The rhythmic beeping of medical monitors had become Rachel Mitchell's lullaby. Night shift at Hamilton Memorial's private wing wasn't where she'd imagined herself at 34, but desperation had a way of reshaping dreams. Her fingers traced the edge of the latest past-due notice crumpled in her scrub's pocket, another reminder that her day job at the diner wasn't cutting it anymore. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, adjusting the IV drip beside the unconscious form of Alexander Drake, tech mogul and Silicon Valley's golden boy. The media circus had finally died down 3 months after his mysterious collapse during a board meeting. Now it was just Rachel, the quiet hum of machines, and the man who'd built an empire from his garage. Her daughter Katie's voice echoed in her mind. "But Mom, what if he never wakes up?" 6-year-old wisdom, sharp as always. Rachel smoothed a wrinkle from Drake's Egyptian cotton sheets, worth more than her monthly rent. A shadow flickered across the window. Rachel froze, her heart stuttering. Security had assured her the 10th floor was locked down tight. Drake's family insisted on it. Still, something felt off. Rachel moved toward the window, her rubber-soled shoes silent on the polished floor. The city lights sparkled beyond the glass, a constellation of urban stars. The monitor's steady rhythm faltered. Rachel spun around, training kicking in as she rushed to check Drake's vitals. His fingers twitched, the first movement she'd seen in weeks of night shifts. Her pulse quickened as she reached for the call button, but something made her hesitate. Drake's eyelids fluttered, and beneath them, his eyes were moving rapidly. REM sleep wasn't unusual in coma patients, but this felt different. His lips parted slightly, and Rachel leaned closer, straining to hear. "They're lying," he whispered, voice barely a thread of sound. "The code. Hidden. Research." Then his vitals stabilized, leaving Rachel standing there, skin prickling with goosebumps. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of doubt and second-guessing. By morning, she'd almost convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. Earth to Mom. Katie waved a syrup-sticky hand in front of Rachel's face. "You're burning the pancakes." "Sorry, sweetheart." Rachel flipped the blackened disc into the trash, trying to focus on the present. Their tiny apartment kitchen filled with morning light, making the chipped countertops and dated cabinets look almost charming. "Was the rich man still sleeping?" Katie asked, demolishing her breakfast with the single-minded focus of a first grader. Rachel hesitated. The hospital's confidentiality agreement had been crystal clear, but this was her daughter. "Yes, honey. Still sleeping." But her mind kept circling back to those whispered words. Something about them felt urgent, like a drowning man's last gasp for air. Rachel dropped Katie at school and headed to her day job at Mel's Diner, Drake's words still echoing in her mind. The breakfast rush kept her moving, but each time she had a quiet moment, questions bubbled up like coffee in a percolator. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Mel said, sliding a plate of hash browns across the pass-through window. The older woman had owned the diner for 30 years and could read people like a menu. "Just tired," Rachel replied, but her hands shook slightly as she grabbed the plate. "Honey, you're working yourself to death with these double shifts." Mel's concern was genuine, but Rachel couldn't afford to listen. "Katie needs braces," she said simply. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. The pile of medical bills from Katie's asthma attacks last winter still haunted their kitchen table. That evening, as Rachel walked through the hospital's sliding doors, something felt different. The usual security guard, Tom, wasn't at his post. Instead, A stern-faced man in a black suit stood there, checking IDs with military precision. "New protocols," he said curtly, examining her badge. "Mr. Drake's condition has attracted attention." Rachel's stomach tightened. Had someone reported last night's incident? But no, she hadn't logged it, hadn't told anyone. The guard waved her through, but she could feel his eyes following her to the elevator. The 10th floor was eerily quiet. Rachel's footsteps echoed as she approached Drake's room, where she found Dr. Harrison reviewing charts with another man in an expensive suit. "Ah, Ms. Mitchell." Dr. Harrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This is Mr. Phillips, from the Drake Industries Board." Phillips gave her a practiced smile that reminded Rachel of car salesmen. "We understand you were on duty last night?" "Yes," Rachel answered carefully, her heart drumming against her ribs. "Nothing unusual to report." "Of course not," Phillips said smoothly. "Mr. Drake's condition remains stable. We're implementing some new monitoring systems. Standard procedure." Rachel noticed the new camera in the corner of the room, its red light blinking steadily. Phillips followed her gaze. "For everyone's protection," he added. "I'm sure you understand." After they left, Rachel began her usual routine, checking vitals and adjusting equipment. But when she leaned close to check Drake's IV, she heard it again, the faintest whisper. "Trust no one." This time she was certain she hadn't imagined it. Rachel's hands trembled as she pretended to adjust Drake's pillows. "I hear you," she whispered back, barely moving her lips. "What's happening?" But Drake had gone silent again, his vital signs steady and unchanged. The camera's red eye watched from above, and Rachel forced herself to continue her normal routine while her mind raced. Later that night, during her brief break, she pulled out her phone and searched for news about Drake Industries. Headlines from 6 months ago screamed about a breakthrough in artificial intelligence, something called Project Oracle. Then Drake's collapse, and suddenly, nothing. The project had vanished from the news like morning mist. A text from Katie's babysitter popped up. "She's asking for her inhaler again." Rachel's heart clenched. She couldn't afford to lose this job, but something was very wrong here. The next morning, exhausted from her shift, Rachel sat in her car outside Katie's school. Other parents walked their children to the entrance, all of them looking more put together than she felt in her wrinkled clothes. "Mom?" Katie's voice was small. "Are you okay?" Rachel met her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror, so serious, so observant, just like her father had been before the accident that took him 3 years ago. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking." "About the sleeping man?" Rachel hesitated. "Sort of. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard decisions. Like when you told me I couldn't have a puppy because our apartment's too small." A laugh bubbled up, unexpected and welcome. Something like that. That evening, Rachel arrived early for her shift and headed straight to the hospital library. The elderly librarian barely glanced up as Rachel logged onto one of the ancient computers. She searched for everything she could find about Alexander Drake. Most articles painted the same picture: brilliant programmer turned tech visionary, known for revolutionary AI work. But one small detail caught her eye: a mention of Drake's brother, Michael, who died in a car accident last year. The article quoted Drake. "Michael was more than my brother. He was my conscience." 2 months later, Drake had announced Project Oracle. 3 months after that, he'd collapsed. The timing nagged at Rachel like a loose tooth. A shadow fell across her screen. She looked up to find Mr. Phillips standing there. "Doing some research, Ms. Mitchell?" Phillips's smile reminded her of a shark. "Just trying to understand my patient better," Rachel said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It helps with care." "Admirable. But perhaps you should focus on his current needs rather than history." Phillips leaned closer, his cologne overwhelming. "Some doors are better left closed." After he left, Rachel sat trembling, staring at the screen. She'd closed the browser, but not before seeing one last detail. Michael Drake's accident had been ruled a suicide, though his body was never found. The pieces were starting to form a pattern, but it was like trying to complete a puzzle in the dark. One thing was clear. Alexander Drake wasn't just sick, he was hiding. That night, Rachel watched the camera in Drake's room more carefully. Every 30 minutes, the red light blinked 3 times, a reset cycle. She counted the seconds between blinks. During one such cycle, Drake's eyes opened fully for the first time. His gaze was sharp, alert, nothing like a man emerging from a coma. "My brother," he whispered urgently. "Find Michael, he's—" The camera light returned, and Drake's eyes closed instantly, his breathing returning to its measured rhythm. Rachel continued her routine, mind spinning. Michael wasn't dead. But where was he? And why was Drake pretending to be comatose? She thought of Katie, of the bills piling up at home. Getting involved could cost her everything. Walking away could cost someone their life. The next day, Rachel called in sick to the diner. Instead of working, she sat in a public library, using their computers to dig deeper. She found old photos of the Drake brothers, Alexander in suits, Michael in casual clothes, but both with the same intense eyes. A news article from last year caught her attention. Michael had opposed Project Oracle, calling it dangerous in a board meeting. 2 weeks later, his car went off a cliff. Rachel's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking, final warning." Her hands shook as she gathered her things. Outside, a black SUV idled across the street. The same one she'd seen outside Katie's school that morning. They were watching her. And now they knew she knew. Rachel raced to pick up Katie from school, arriving 20 minutes early. Her daughter's teacher, Ms. Torres, noticed her agitation. "Everything okay, Mrs. Mitchell?" "Just not feeling well," Rachel managed. "Thought I'd pick her up early." Katie's face lit up when she saw her mom, but her smile faded at Rachel's expression. In the car, she asked, "Are we going home?" "No, sweetie. We're going to visit Aunt Jenny for a while." Rachel's sister lived 2 hours away in a small town. They needed somewhere safe while she figured this out. Her phone rang, the hospital's number. Rachel let it go to voicemail. Whatever was happening at Drake Industries, it was bigger than a missing paycheck, bigger than overdue bills. People didn't fake comas and surveillance for small stakes. Jenny opened her door, took one look at Rachel's face, and pulled them inside. "Katie, honey, I just made cookies. They're in the kitchen." Once Katie was out of earshot, Jenny demanded, "What's wrong?" Rachel told her everything. Her sister listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker. "You need to go to the police," Jenny said finally. "With what?" "A few whispered words and some coincidences." Rachel shook her head. "They're too powerful. I need proof." "And Katie needs her mother alive," Jenny countered. "This isn't your fight." But Rachel remembered Drake's desperate whispers, the warning in his eyes. If his own brother had been silenced for opposing Project Oracle, what else were they capable of? Sometimes it becomes your fight whether you want it or not. That night, after Katie was asleep in Jenny's guest room, Rachel used her sister's laptop to dig deeper. She found a tech forum where Michael Drake had posted frequently before his disappearance. His last message was cryptic. The Oracle sees everything. But who watches the watchers? A reply caught her eye, posted months later. The truth hides in plain sight. Check the basement. Rachel's pulse quickened. Hamilton Memorial had a massive basement level, mostly storage and old records. She'd been there once for orientation. More importantly, it was the only area of the hospital without modern security cameras. She called the hospital and left a message saying she had a family emergency but would return tomorrow night. Then she started planning. She'd have one chance to search that basement. If she was wrong, she'd lose her job. If she was right, she might lose much more. The next evening, Rachel parked 2 blocks from the hospital. She'd borrowed Jenny's clothes and pulled her hair into a different style. The security guard was the new one again. Good. He'd be watching for her regular appearance. She used her ID at a side entrance, then took the service elevator down. The basement lights flickered, casting long shadows. The air smelled of old paper and dust. Following the wall, Rachel counted doors until she reached the record section. Her hands shook as she swiped her card. To her surprise, it worked. They hadn't deactivated it yet. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched into darkness. But something caught her eye. A section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest. Newer paint, maybe. She pressed against it and felt it give slightly. Behind the false wall panel, Rachel found a narrow passage. Her phone's flashlight revealed a metal door with a keypad. On the wall beside it, someone had scratched a series of numbers. Heart pounding, she tried them. The door clicked open. Inside was a small room filled with computers. Screens displayed code she didn't understand, but one monitor showed security feeds from Drake's room. There, in crystal clear footage, she saw Drake's eyes open. He was scanning his room, alert and aware. I wondered when someone would find this place. Rachel spun around. A man stood in the doorway, thinner than his photos, with a beard now, but unmistakable. Michael Drake was alive. "My brother sent you, didn't he?" Michael asked, closing the door behind him. "He's always been good at reading people." "He didn't send me exactly," Rachel said, "but he's been trying to communicate. What's Project Oracle really about?" Michael's face darkened. An AI system designed to predict and influence human behavior. But it evolved beyond our control. It started making decisions on its own. Who gets loans? Who gets jobs? Who gets arrested? Why fake your death? To work against it from the shadows. Alex discovered what it was doing and joined me, staging his coma to avoid Oracle's surveillance. But we need proof to shut it down. He hesitated. "Will you help us?" Rachel thought of Katie, of right and wrong, of doors that couldn't be closed once opened. "What do you need me to do?" Rachel asked. "Oracle's core servers are in Drake Industries' headquarters. We need someone inside who won't trigger their security algorithms. Someone they've already vetted." Michael pulled out a small device. "This will copy their data, but it has to be plugged directly into their main system." "And you think I can just walk in there?" "You already have. The hospital wing? It's connected to their network. There's a terminal in the private elevator, the one only board members use. Alex made sure you'd have access through your ID badge." Rachel remembered the elevator she'd been told never to use. Now she understood why Phillips had been so interested in her background check. "When?" "Tonight, during shift change. It's our only chance. The private elevator was unlocked, just as Michael had said it would be. Rachel's hands were steady as she opened the control panel and plugged in the device. Numbers scrolled across its tiny screen. Her radio crackled. "Ms. Mitchell, please report to the nurses' station." She ignored it, watching the progress bar inch forward. 60%, 70%, 80%. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. 90%. The elevator doors began to close. Rachel stuck her foot out, blocking them. 95%. "Ms. Mitchell?" Phillips's voice carried down the hall. 98%, 99%. The device beeped softly. Done. Rachel pulled it free just as Phillips rounded the corner. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Rachel held up her cleaning supplies. "Just following the new protocols, sir. Sanitizing everything between shifts." Phillips studied her for a long moment. "Of course. Very thorough of you." Rachel felt his eyes on her back as she walked away. In her pocket, the device seemed to burn against her leg. All that evidence, all those secrets. When she reached Drake's room, his eyes were open again. He gave her the slightest nod. "Time for your evening medication, Mr. Drake," she said loudly for the cameras. Then whispered, "It's done." His hand twitched just slightly, but she understood. Tomorrow, Michael would release everything to the media. The truth about Oracle, about the manipulation, about the cover-up. Tonight would be her last shift here. She'd already arranged for Katie to stay with Jenny a while longer, just until things settled down. The next morning, Rachel watched the news explode from Jenny's living room. Drake Industries' stock plummeted as the revelations hit. Project Oracle was exposed, its tentacles reaching into every aspect of digital life. Alexander Drake made a miraculous recovery, just in time to testify before Congress. Michael emerged from hiding with comprehensive documentation of Oracle's overreach. Phillips and several board members were led away in handcuffs. The investigations would take years. "Mom," Katie called from the kitchen. "Can we have pancakes?" Rachel smiled, heading to the stove. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander Drake. "Thank you. How would you like to help us build something better?" She looked at Katie, happily drawing at the table. Sometimes the biggest choices came down to the smallest moments. 1 year later, Rachel walked into the new Drake Technologies headquarters. Not as a night nurse, but as the head of their ethics advisory board. Her first rule: any AI development had to pass the Katie test. Would she want it making decisions about her daughter's future? Michael and Alexander worked alongside her, building systems to help people rather than control them. The brothers had learned their lesson about unchecked power. Katie's braces gleamed as she smiled, sitting in Rachel's new office after school, doing her homework while her mom attended meetings. Sometimes she'd wave to Alexander Drake through the glass walls, and he'd wave back, no longer pretending to sleep. Rachel had finally found what she'd been looking for all along, not just a job, but a purpose. And it had all started with a whisper in the dark.